Hello everyone, my name is Alan Armstrong. I am an aviation lawyer and an airshow demonstration pilot. And today's hot topic is dynamic maneuvering. This is an issue in the airshow industry among airshow performers and airshow producers. It is of recent origin in terms of the FAA's regulations on the topic, and we're going to discuss that today. By way of background, in or about 2010, I wrote an aerial script, The Battle of Midway. We took 7 airplanes, a Kate, a Zero, a Dauntless, 2 S&Js, a B-25, and a TBM Avenger, and we reenacted the Battle of Midway. In today's terminology, that airshow performance would be viewed as dynamic maneuvering. We had head-on passes where the Japanese aircraft attacked the American base. The American fighters took off from the face of the Japanese, so we had direct opposing passes. After the attack, the Japanese reversed course, separated. The Allied fighters got on their tails, shot them down. Then the Japanese aircraft rejoined and the American aircraft rejoined. So there was a lot of configuration changes in the various formations during the course of the performance. In the 2018 airshow season, I flew the Nakajima Kate, and along with a Helldiver, a Corsair, and a Dauntless dive bomber in what was called the Prowlers of the Pacific. Again, we had what would be called today dynamic maneuvering. We had the Corsair and the Kate going in a racetrack in a clockwise direction, while the Dauntless and Helldiver were going in a counterclockwise direction. So that resulted in head-on opposing passes with lateral separation that we briefed before we flew. We knew what we had to do to ensure the separation. We had markings on the runways and the environment that we knew we had to hit to avoid having any kind of a head-on collision. So we had that briefed before we flew. And we practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced walking through the sequences before we flew. Everyone knew what they had to do. On October the 10th of 2019, the FAA promulgated FAA Order 8900.526, policy updates for issuing a certificate of waiver or authorization for an aviation event. Those of you in the airshow industry and those of you who are demonstration pilots will know that the FAA Order 8900 is the order that governs the conduct and behavior and authority of FAA inspectors. But 8900-526 is an appendix or a supplement to the order that deals specifically with issuing waivers for air shows. It has all the documentation in there about the timing, the forms, the requirements for issuing a waiver, the circumstances under which the waiver is issued. But what we're concerned about is the language in this order dealing with dynamic maneuvering. And one of the new provisions in this order was dynamic maneuvering. So let's take a walk down memory lane. As pilots, we learned early in our flight training the definition of aerobatic maneuvering under Federal Aviation Regulation 91.303. Aerobatic flight means an intentional maneuver involving an abrupt change in an aircraft's attitude, an abnormal attitude, or abnormal acceleration not necessary for normal flight. That regulation is not the most instructive or scientifically clear definition of what aerobatic flight is in terms of an abrupt maneuver or abrupt change in attitude. But we do have further information in the regulations. If you look at 91.307 that deals with parachutes, 91.307 says if you're going to have a pitch angle of more than 30 degrees or a bank angle of greater than 60 degrees, then that requires parachutes, and that has been construed in aviation parlance to be one indicia of aerobatic flight. More than 30 degrees pitch and more than 60 degrees of bank. Well, what's aerobatics in the civilian flight environment is not aerobatics in the airshow environment. They're not the same. The reason I say that is if you look at the FAA Order 526 in paragraph 3-143 Bravo, it says aerobatic flight is defined as a pitch attitude of more than 60 degrees above or below the horizon and an angle of bank of more than 75 degrees in reference to the horizon. So civilian world, more than 30 pitch, more than 60 bank. Airshow world, more than 60 pitch, more than 75 bank. So there are two different definitions of aerobatics in the civilian flying world and the airshow flying world. That's the first concept you've got to understand. The second thing is that the order recommends that the airshow sponsor and producer seek a waiver from 91.303 in the application for waiver from 91.303. Why would you seek a waiver from 91.303 when you're making your application for your waiver for the air show or the aerial demonstration? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we just saw that 91.303 is vague. It's not really meaningful. So why would you clutter up your air show performance with a definition of aerobatics that is vague? You wouldn't want to do that. So that's why the FAA recommends that you seek a waiver in your documentation from 91.303. All right, the way that air shows work, of course we have the air boss. He runs the show. But we have an agency inspector there, the inspector in charge, a representative of the administrator of the FAA, and his job is to make sure the air show is operated in a safe manner. And he has to satisfy himself that the flight operations are in fact safe and in compliance either with the Federal Aviation Regulations or the waiver itself, because the waiver is going to depart from the regulations, but the performers must fly within the confines of the waiver itself, the strictures of the waiver itself. And so he has the right to request of a performer proof that the performer has an aerobatic competency card, commonly called a SAC card, and the SAC card will have a dynamic maneuvering endorsement. And what this means is that the performer or performers went before an ACE, an aerobatic competency evaluator, flew the flight sequence, had the routine evaluated, and the ACE said they were safe for flight and issued them the endorsement in the form of the SAC card. Now, what is dynamic maneuvering? There are two definitions. First, in a solo flight, dynamic maneuvering includes abrupt maneuvering, crossing maneuvers, and opposing maneuvers. The pitch and bank limitations are when the pitch attitude of the aircraft is less than or equal to 60 degrees above or below the horizon, and or the bank angle is less than or equal to 90 degrees in reference to the horizon. Well, let's break this down a bit. So we're going to go back at the top. Includes abrupt maneuvering. Well, now we're back to 91.303. Remember that definition of aerobatics? Abrupt changes in pitch or bank? So now we're back at abrupt maneuvering. So dynamic maneuvering is going back and reintroducing some of the language from 91.303 that we've already decided was vague to start with, but now it's back in the definition of dynamic maneuvering. But that's not the only thing that's troublesome about the definition of dynamic maneuvering. It says, in a solo flight, dynamic maneuvering includes an abrupt maneuvering, crossing maneuvers. Wait, I thought I was solo. If I'm solo, with whom am I crossing? So this doesn't make any sense. Apparently this was rushed out, but whether it was rushed or conducted in a leisurely fashion, it still doesn't make any sense to me as an airshow performer how solo flight can involve a crossing maneuver. So this is poorly written, it's vague, it's ambiguous, it's self-contradictory, and I can use all other kinds of lawyer expressions I would use in a courtroom to be critical of this document, but it just doesn't make any sense. And so this is the kind of language that you as an airshow performer, as an airshow pilot, are going to have to confront when you go to fly at the airshow to know whether you can or cannot fly your aircraft the way you want to. And you're going to have to negotiate this with the IIC to decide what you can and what you cannot do. So this introduces a level of confusion, of ambiguity and uncertainty in an airshow environment, which is the last place that you want ambiguity, uncertainty. You don't want this. We need to have hard and fast rules, hard and fast minimums, hard and fast minimum altitudes, hard and fast airspeeds, hard and fast points, ground reference points, corner markers and what have you. And now we don't have that. We have this fuzzy, ambiguous language about abrupt maneuvering and crossing maneuvers in reference to solo flight that just don't really help us as pilots to know what we can and what we cannot do. It does say pitch of 60 and bank of 90. We got that. That's empirical. That's something that can be measured. But crossing maneuvers in solo flight cannot be measured because it makes no sense. Okay, then there's a second definition of dynamic maneuvering. In a formation flight, dynamic maneuvering includes formation separation, formation configuration, position changes, rejoins, crossing maneuvers, and opposing maneuvers. The pitch and bank limitations are when the pitch attitude of the aircraft is less than or equal to 60 degrees above or below the horizon, and or the bank angle is less than or equal to 75 degrees in reference to the horizon. Well, once again, let's break this down. First of all, we have had, if you've got a formation card, you have done hundreds of rejoins in your flying career. Rejoins are common fare for a formation, to break up the formation and rejoin the formation. That's very, very common in formation flying. But now your ability to fly your flight as a formation flight has been constricted because now your rejoins are considered dynamic maneuvering. So this, again, this doesn't make any sense. Why are something we've been doing for years, for decades, now suddenly is prohibited unless we have a SAC card? The opposing maneuvers, I get that. Sure, we can talk about we can talk about opposing maneuvers. I get the fact that they don't want head-on passes unless it's been practiced. And when we did Midway, we practiced it over and over and over and over and over again, both on the ground and in the sky. We would fly the sequence. By the way, when we practiced Midway, we had to get a waiver to practice because we're flying at 200 feet above the deck. So we had to go to the feds and get a waiver and shut the airport down except for us and fly the routine and land and debrief the flight and find out the things that we did right, the things that we did wrong, and then take a rest break and go do it again. And that's how we practice for Midway. And this is not cheap. Having 7 airplanes flying around, practicing a routine, consuming gasoline and putting wear and tear of the engines is not an inexpensive undertaking. And that's something that you only will do if you think you're going to make money at it, because no one's got the luxury of just burning up their engines and their airplanes casually without the expectation that this labor is going to result in some sort of economic payback. But anyway, the opposing maneuvers for dynamic maneuvering, understand it. We'd had opposing maneuvers in Midway. We had opposing maneuvers in Prowlers of the Pacific. We had heard several years ago that this was coming, that this opposing maneuvers was coming. It didn't reach fruition until the fall of 2019. But rejoins, something we've been doing for, 30, 40, 50 years, are now being dynamic and are prohibited unless you have a dynamic maneuvering SAC card, I don't know what their necessity is for that. It's just, again, it means now we got to enter the box in a formation, in a rigid formation. We can't move. However we enter the box is how we got to leave the box. We can't have any changes in the formation in the box. We're locked together in that formation, and we cannot do anything else. And our pitch attitude is limited to 60 degrees, and our bank angle is limited to 75 degrees for dynamic maneuvering. This other language in this PowerPoint, this is about an effort, and this is just a side. We're just going to digress for just a second. Everyone knows you go to the air show, you present your medical, your airman certificate, you show the date of your last biennial flight review. So they have to assess that you're fit to fly and you're good to fly as a pilot. Then they have to look at your airplane and satisfy themselves that the airplane is airworthy. Look at the last condition inspection, the static system check, the transponder check, and the airworthiness directive list, and what have you, to make sure the aircraft is airworthy. What they're trying to move towards is a situation where we put the data in one time at the beginning of the air show season, and then at the first air show, we're physically checked, we the pilots, both the pilots and the aircraft, and once that first check has been achieved, we're done for the rest of the season. However, this is not moving forward as quickly as planned, and it looks like as the 2020 air show season is ahead of us, that we can anticipate being checked at every air show, not just the first air show, but every air show. So air show pilots out there, demonstration pilots out there, be prepared to have your airman credentials checked at every air show and the airworthiness of your aircraft to be checked at every air show. So if you read FAA Order 8-900-526, paragraph 3, 146 deals with the performer's authorizations to conduct various flight operations, their qualifications. 3-146 deals with qualifications. So, if the performers intend to engage in dynamic maneuvering, they must present the FAA inspector in charge with a statement of aerobatic competency, a SAC card, with a dynamic maneuvering endorsement and evidence that, let's see, find it, and evidence that within 45 days prior to the air show, they've practiced. Well now, and also bear this in mind, and this is a real killer. The performance of the Airshow Act at practice day will not satisfy the requirement. So you talk about making things difficult for airshow performers. We're flying Second World War high-performance aircraft that consume vast quantities of aviation fuel. They're expensive to operate, and now we're not going to be able to get recurrent at the practice day. Even if we went to the ACE and got we got the SAC card with the dynamic maneuvering endorsement. We've got a hell diver in Texas. We've got to fly it from Texas to Georgia, where the Corsair and the Dauntless and the Kate are located, and we've got to practice on our own dime this performance because we can't do it at practice day. And the reason given by the FAA is if we practice at practice day, we might crash and kill someone. Well, here's the truth. Anybody flying at practice day could crash and kill someone, so that really doesn't really make any sense either, does it? Now, the information that we've received is Prowlers of the Pacific the show is grandfathered. So if you're not grandfathered before you can go to the ACE to be evaluated, you've got to have, are you ready for this? You've got to have 30 practice sessions. Imagine 30 practice sessions with a Corsair, a Kate, a hell diver. I mean, really? 30 practice sessions? How many tens of thousands of dollars is that going to cost to be prepared to fly in the air show. It's not economically possible. I mean, if you're a multimillionaire and you've got all the money in the world to spend, then sure, knock yourself out. You can fly every day. But that's not the way that we're funded. We don't have the resources for 30 practice sessions. Now, okay, so we're grandfathered, but we still have to have the SAC card with a dynamic maneuvering endorsement. We have to, if we're going to do that, we got to get a waiver. We got to shut the airport down so the ace can watch us fly, and we've got to do the performance. He's got to see the maneuvers, and then the ace issues us the SAC card with a dynamic maneuvering endorsement. But once we get the card, how long is it good for? 45 days. If we don't get a gig, if we don't get an air show performance within 45 days of that authorization by the ace, we got to do it all over again. We got to fly the Helldiver back from Texas, and we got to have another performance with the Kate, the Helldiver, the Corsair, the Dauntless, and do this all over again. I mean, if you want to find a way to kill dogfighting at air shows, this is how you would do it. This is exactly how you would go about it. If your ambition was to shut down dogfighting at air shows, this is the perfect way to stop it, and that's exactly what the agency has done, unfortunately. Okay, so let's try to put a positive spin on this as we can. I mean, it's hard to find some sunshine in this, but let's try to find something here that we can salvage to go forward as pilots with this. So we know these are from the tables in the order, table 3-6. Anybody walking off the street with a commercial license can do standard maneuvering solo, no credential required. He can fly 60 degrees of pitch, 75 degrees of bank, and he can fly 100 feet above the ground at 300 knots. Now, we can talk about why you would want to fly 100 feet above the ground, because if you're that low, very few people can see you anyway, except the people in the front line or so of the spectator area. 100 feet is not necessary, but if you feel the compulsion, the need to be that low, this table lets you fly that way. Anyway, so anybody, 60 pitch, 75 bank, 100 feet, 300 knots, no SAC card. Now you're dynamic maneuvering solo. Dynamic maneuvering solo is 60 degrees of pitch, 90 degrees of bank, equal to or greater than 100 feet above ground level, and no limitations on the airspeed. You just can't go supersonic. But these World War II airplanes don't go supersonic, so that's not something that we're concerned about. So these are your limitations for dynamic maneuvering solo. 60 pitch, 90 bank, 100 feet AGL, no limitations on the speed. Aerobatic maneuvering solo. This is you've got a SAC card with an aerobatic solo endorsement, AS, aerobatic solo endorsement. You get to fly more than 60 degrees of pitch, more than 75 degrees of bank. Your altitude, you have no limitations with an AS level 1 card, and your airspeed has no limitations, just don't go supersonic. Now we have standard maneuvering formation. These are credentialed pilots who have a FAST card authorization. They've demonstrated competency in formation flying. They have to demonstrate that at least once a year. So this is for formation flying. Formation limitations are 45 degrees of pitch, 60 degrees of bank, 250 feet on the altitude, and 250 knots on the airspeed. So those are your limitations for formation flying. 45 pitch, 60 bank, 250 altitude, 250 knots. Now we have dynamic maneuvering formation. This is what the Battle of Midway performance was. This is what the Prowlers of the Pacific was. I say was because we'll probably never do it again with these restrictions. So dynamic maneuvering formation, pitch 60 degrees, bank 75 degrees, altitude 250 feet, and airspeed, no limitations, just don't go supersonic for your dynamic maneuvering formation. To repeat, 60 pitch, 75 bank, 50 feet, and no limitations on the airspeed, just don't go supersonic. And now we're finally back to the sixth possible category of flight at an air show, and this is aerobatic formation, AF, like aeroshell. Pitch greater than 60 degrees, bank greater than 75 degrees, altitude 250 feet, and airspeed no limitations. So this is what the aerobatic maneuvering formation, the AF, aerobatic maneuvering formation limitations are. And this is a kneeboard summary. If you contact me at my office, call me, 770-451-0313. Email me, Alan@AlanArmstrongLaw.com, and I'll get this to you. This is your kneeboard. This is something that you can carry with you because the rules of engagement have changed. It's no longer a matter of showing up at the air show, asking where the corner markers are, and ascertaining where the 500-foot line is and where the 1,000-foot line is and where the 1,500-foot line is for the category 3, 2, and 1 operations. It's not that simple anymore. Now you've got to know what you can do once you get there. And my estimation is it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis with the IIC, depending upon how they interpret this ambiguous language that we don't know what it means. So you probably want to put this in your flight kit, put it on your kneeboard, have it available to you so that you can discuss this intelligently with the IIC at the air show. Because if he tells you you cannot do something that you can do, you might want to reference him to the 8900-526 and show him that you can in fact do what you propose to do. But at the risk of being redundant, dynamic maneuvering requires a SAC card with a dynamic maneuvering endorsement and is defined as abrupt maneuvering, crossing maneuvers, and opposing maneuvers. The limitations are 60 pitch and 90 bank for solo. And we talked about opposing maneuvers solo. Makes no sense, but I didn't write the rule. They wrote the rule, so we're stuck with this ambiguous rule. Formation separation, configuration and position changes, rejoins, crossing maneuvers, and opposing maneuvers. Limitations are 60 pitch, 75 degrees of bank. As we talked about before, historically, formations could do rejoins, but now you can't. Once you enter the box, you must rigidly stay in the same formation. You cannot move. And so we have, as we talked about before, anybody with a commercial license, standard maneuvering solo, the limitations are pitch 60 degrees, bank 75 degrees, altitude 100 feet, and 300 knots in the airspeed. So that's anybody walking off the street with a commercial license can do 60 pitch, 75 bank, 100 feet, and 300 knots. Dynamic maneuvering solo, the limitations are pitch 60 degrees, bank 90 degrees, altitude 100 feet, and airspeed, no limitations except don't go supersonic. Aerobatic maneuvering solo, the limitations are pitch more than 60, bank more than 75, altitude no limitations, airspeed no limitations, just don't go supersonic. Standard maneuvering formation, pitch 45, bank 60, 250 feet on the altitude, and airspeed 250 knots. Then dynamic maneuvering formation, pitch 60, 75 degrees of bank, 250 feet AGL, airspeed no limitations, and finally aerobatic maneuvering formation, AF, the limitations, you can go more than 60 degrees of bank, more than 6 degrees of pitch, more than 75 degrees of bank, altitude 250 feet, AGL, and no limitations on the airspeed. So the reason I made this presentation is I find this promulgation of this new order extremely confusing. I find it problematic, and I'm hoping that it can and can't do. So be armed, be aware of this, have this kneeboard in your flight kit, and be prepared to discuss your flying performance with the IIC in an intelligent manner. If you have any questions, please contact me at my office, 770-451-0313. Contact me at my email, Alan, A-L-A-N, @AlanArmstrongLaw.com. Safe flying. Take care, guys. So long.